It was the Simons. 60 floors below the gleaming crown of King Tower, the most photographed skyscraper on the Manhattan skyline, the symbol of Declan King's empire, the pride of every business magazine cover from here to London, there was a room that did not exist on any blueprint. No architect had signed off on it. No contractor had ever spoken of it. It had no official name, but the few wolves who knew of its existence called it the Obsidian. Charlotte Nightwhisper had been in the Obsidian for 11 days. She knew because she had counted every heartbeat. Not her own. Hers had grown slow and measured, a kind of deliberate calm she had trained herself to maintain. But the two tiny, rapid heartbeats that passed just below her ribs. Steady, fierce, alive. They were the only clock she trusted. The room was cold in the way that expensive things are cold. Intentional, controlled, engineered. Obsidian panels lined every wall, cutting off all wolf scents. No scent carried through the air, no sound escaped its frame, and the faint electromagnetic hum buried in the floor disrupted any attempt at a shift. Someone had spent a great deal of money ensuring that whoever was held here could not fight their way out. Charlotte did not try to fight her way out. She sat upright on the low steel platform that served as a seat, her back straight, her silver-white hair loose around her shoulders, like something between a bridal veil and a battle flag. Her dress, once a deep ivory gown threaded with subtle silver embroidery, the kind of dress a woman wore when she was still somebody, was torn at the hem and stained at the sleeve. But her posture said something her dress could not. She had not been defeated. She had been delayed. She was 26 years old. She carried the last bloodline of the Silver Wolves, and for the first time in a century, that bloodline had doubled. The door at the far end of the Obsidian opened. He didn't knock. Declan King never knocked. He was the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller simply by entering them, not because of his height, though he was tall, and not because of the tailored black suit that fit him like a second skin, though it was clearly custom-made down to the last stitch. It was something older than fashion, and more dangerous than wealth. It was the alpha authority that radiated off him in waves, the silent command that said, "Everything in this room belongs to me, including the air." He walked toward her without hurrying. Charlotte did not look away. That was the thing about Declan King that people who had never met him in person failed to understand. They saw the magazine covers, the sharp jaw, the icy blue eyes, the controlled expression that gave away nothing, and they assumed coldness. What they missed were the eyes themselves. Not the color, but what lived behind the color. A flicker. Something between fury and fascination. The look of a man who had never once encountered something he could not solve, and was beginning to suspect that she might be it. He stopped 3 feet away. "Good morning, Ms. Nightwhisper." His voice was low, measured, a voice trained to close billion-dollar deals and end conversations with a word. Charlotte tilted her head slightly. "Is it morning? I've lost track." "You've lost nothing," he said. "You've chosen not to answer my questions. There's a difference." She met his eyes. Hold them. "Then perhaps you're asking the wrong questions." For a moment, just one, brief and electric, something shifted behind his gaze. His jaw tightened. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and withdrew a single photograph, setting it on the steel platform beside her. The Ledger of the Nightwhisper. An ancient, silver-bound book that had not been seen publicly in 40 years, photographed at an exchange between two figures. One of them was wearing Charlotte's coat. "Explain that," he said. She looked at the photograph, then back at him. "That coat was stolen from me 3 weeks before that photograph was taken," she said, "by the same man who told you I betrayed your pack." The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything unspoken, everything at stake, every secret buried in the blood running through her veins, and the two small hearts beating inside her. Declan King picked up the photograph. He did not leave. This is where the story begins. Not at the chains, not at the coldness. At the moment a man built entirely from control looked into the eyes of a woman built entirely from endurance and felt, for the first time in his life, uncertain. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because if this story already has your heart beating a little faster, if Charlotte's silence already feels like something you understand in your bones, then you know this is going somewhere extraordinary. Thank you so much for being here. It genuinely means the world. Stories like this only reach the people who need them most when the community shows up. So if Charlotte's courage is already pulling at something inside you, please hit that subscribe button right now, smash that like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in New York, Lagos, London, Manila, Melbourne? I will personally love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is traveling. It helps more than you know. All right. Thank you. Now let's go back, because things are about to get a whole lot more complicated.
They brought her a meal on the 12th morning. Not out of kindness, Charlotte understood that much. Declan King had not survived the corporate wolf world by being sentimental. He had done it by being precise. A prisoner who collapsed from starvation before she talked was a wasted resource. The meal was strategic. Still, the smell of warm broth hit her hard, and she had to press one hand flat against her knee to hide the small tremor that ran through her fingers. Not fear, hunger. The kind that went deeper than her stomach now. She ate slowly, deliberately, and kept her expression neutral. The guard who brought the tray was young, mid-20s, broad-shouldered, with the careful eyes of someone who had been told very specifically not to speak to the woman in the obsidian. He set the tray down without meeting her gaze and turned to leave. "Thank you," Charlotte said quietly. He stopped, hesitated, left without answering. But his step had slowed just slightly, the way a person's step slows when they've heard something they were not expecting. That was important. Charlotte filed it away. Declan returned an hour later with Wolfgang Kästner. Wolfgang was hard to read in the way that old mountains were hard to read, massive, still, and carrying the kind of weight that did not announce itself. He was Declan's beta, his oldest advisor, the man who had stood beside the King pack through 3 generations of leadership. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, regardless of the temperature, and moved through rooms the way glaciers moved through valleys, slowly, quietly, and with the absolute certainty that anything in the path would eventually give way. He was also, Charlotte noted, the only person in this building who looked at her with something other than suspicion or dismissal. He looked at her like a question he had not yet decided to ask out loud. Declan crossed his arms and looked down at her. "The ledger. I want its location. Not what you claim happened to your coat." Not another deflection. The location. "Declan?" Wolfgang's voice was low, a quiet note of warning. Declan didn't look at him. "I'm handling it." Charlotte set down her spoon with a small, deliberate sound. She looked up at Declan, then at Wolfgang, then back at Declan. She'd spent 11 days studying this dynamic. Declan was brilliant and furious, and convinced he already knew the answer to every question he was asking. Wolfgang was the kind of man who let other people be wrong for exactly as long as it took them to be ready to hear the truth. "The ledger of the Night Whisper," Charlotte said carefully, "cannot be found by force. It doesn't work that way. It never has. It reveals itself to the bloodline it belongs to, and to that bloodline only. If Stefan told you otherwise, he lied to you. He's been lying to you." The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Declan's jaw tightened. "Stefan brought me evidence," Stefan built you evidence, she said. There is a significant difference. Wolfgang cleared his throat once, softly, and that was all. But Declan's eyes moved to him just for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction Charlotte saw something she had not expected. Doubt. It was the first crack. She did not press it. She had learned early that the moment you press a crack in someone like Declan King, it seals. You had to let it breathe. Let him find his way to the truth without feeling like someone was pulling him there. That night, alone in the obsidian, Charlotte lay on her back with one hand resting against her abdomen. "I know," she whispered to the 2 heartbeats that answered her through the dark. "I'm working on it." She had not told anyone about the pregnancy, not even Dolores, especially not Dolores. Her younger sister was 22, warm and impulsive, and too brave for her own good, the kind of person who would charge headfirst into a situation she couldn't handle if she thought Charlotte needed saving.
Keeping Dolores in the dark was the only way to keep Dolores safe. Charlotte prayed it was still working. It was the thing about being the older sibling, the protector, the one who always held the map. You spent so much energy making sure everyone else was okay that the moment you were the one in trouble, you had no one to call. You had only yourself. And the 2 quiet heartbeats that reminded you what you were fighting for. There is a lesson in Charlotte's silence that the world rarely teaches us. The strongest people are not the ones who never need help. They are the ones who protect others so completely that by the time they need saving, they've forgotten how to ask. Recognizing that pattern, in ourselves and in the people around us, is the first step to breaking it. The video came on the 14th day. Declan brought it himself. He didn't speak when he entered, just set a sleek tablet on the steel platform and stepped back, his expression unreadable, his arms folded. His blue eyes were watching Charlotte's face rather than the screen. He was looking for something, a fracture, a tell. Charlotte pressed play. The footage was clear and high definition, because Stefan always did things well when he wanted an audience. He was standing in what looked like a well-appointed room, one of his properties, Charlotte guessed, something out west, Los Angeles maybe, wearing an expensive watch and a suit that did not fit his posture. Stefan had the body of a man who took what he wanted, and the bearing of a man who was always afraid someone would take it back. He smiled at the camera with all his teeth. Beside him, seated but not restrained, was Dolores. Her younger sister was trying very hard to look unbothered. Charlotte could tell because of the way Dolores was holding her hands, too still, too deliberate, every finger precisely placed in her lap, the way you place things when you were using control to substitute for calm. "Charlotte," Stefan said warmly, as though they were old friends catching up. "I hope your accommodations have been comfortable. I wanted you to see that your sister is perfectly fine. She's my guest, not my prisoner." He paused, just long enough to let the word guest settle wrong. "She'll stay that way, of course, as long as you cooperate with Alpha King's reasonable requests. The ledger, Charlotte. That's all anyone wants." He reached over and patted Dolores on the shoulder. Dolores flinched. It was small, barely visible, but Charlotte saw it because she had spent 26 years reading every tiny signal her sister's body made. She had memorized Dolores, the way you memorize something precious that you are terrified of losing. The screen went dark. Charlotte set the tablet down. She breathed. Once, twice. She did not let her hands shake, and she did not let her voice crack. And she looked directly at Declan King with the clearest eyes she had. "You didn't know about this," she said. It was not a question. Something moved across his face, fast, controlled, gone almost before it arrived. "What I know is that you have a sister who is being held as leverage, and the fastest way to end her situation is for you to give me what I'm asking for." "Declan?" He stilled, very slightly.
She had used his first name without asking permission, without flinching, without the downward look that everyone else gave him. He was not accustomed to it. "If you give Stefan the ledger," she said, "my sister won't come home. Neither does yours." The temperature in the room dropped. "What did you say?" His voice was very quiet now. The kind of quiet that, in a wolf of his rank, meant the opposite of calm. "Stefan has been building towards something for 2 years. He's not collecting the ledger because he wants power. He's collecting it because he needs to feed it to something that wants power far more than he does. Something old. Something that doesn't negotiate." She paused. "If you want your pack to still exist 6 months from now, you need to stop acting on what Stefan told you and start asking why he told it." For a long moment, Declan said nothing. Then he picked up the tablet. He walked to the door. He stopped in the frame. "I'll look into it." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement she had gotten from him in 2 weeks. After he left, Charlotte exhaled slowly through her nose and pressed both hands flat against her abdomen. The 2 heartbeats pulsed back at her, quick and bright, like Morse code from somewhere ancient. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I haven't used my last card yet." In the offices above, Wolfgang Kästner was already pulling files that Stefan had not wanted pulled. He had been suspicious for weeks.
He was the kind of man who kept his suspicions quiet and his evidence thorough. The kind of loyalty that never announces itself. He found the first discrepancy in the pack financial records at 11:14 that night. By midnight, he had found 7 more. On the 16th day, they brought Suzanne. It was Wolfgang's doing. Charlotte was almost certain of it. The official reason was that the prisoner's health was declining and a formal medical assessment was required. The real reason, Charlotte suspected, was that Wolfgang had noticed the way she sometimes pressed her hand to her side when she thought no one was watching. And Wolfgang noticed everything. Suzanne was not what Charlotte had expected. She was, perhaps, 70, small and deliberate in her movements, dressed in hand-woven linen the color of old bone, a startling contrast to the engineered precision of King Tower. She smelled of dried herbs and pine sap, and something older and stranger that Charlotte's wolf sense caught before her mind named it. Silver. The old kind. The kind that lived in bloodlines rather than metal. Suzanne walked into the obsidian without looking at the walls, or the chains, or the obsidian panels. She looked only at Charlotte. She sat down across from her on the plain chair the guard had provided, set a worn leather case on her knee, and folded her hands on top of it. Then she smiled. It was the knowing kind of smile, the kind that meant the person wearing it had already read the last page of a book you were still on chapter 3 of. "You've been eating the broth," Suzanne said. "Good. Your body is working very hard right now, and it needs protein." Charlotte went still. "You know." "I've known since before you did." Suzanne unclasped her case with easy hands. "The silver blood reveals itself to healers of my line before it fully wakes. We are its first witnesses. I have been waiting for this for 30 years, child, since before your mother carried you." Charlotte stared at her. "They are true kings," Suzanne said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but landing with the weight of a declaration. "The old texts called them the paired light, 2 born of silver, who carry the authority to stand above the alpha rank without challenge, not through force, through blood right, the kind that cannot be manufactured and cannot be stolen." Charlotte's throat tightened. She had grown up with the Silver Wolf stories the way most children grew up with fairy tales, half believed, half dismissed, kept alive more by family habit than genuine faith. Hearing it spoken plainly in this room, in this tower, inside these chains, was something different entirely.
"Why here?" Charlotte asked. "Why now? Why in his tower?" Suzanne was quiet for a moment, sorting through her case. "Because the safest place in the world right now is inside the most fortified building on the eastern seaboard. And the man who built it doesn't know that's why you're here." "You led him to me." Charlotte's voice was flat. "I fed Stefan a rumor that I knew Declan King would act on." Suzanne was unapologetic. "You needed his walls, his technology, his electromagnetic shielding. The void has eyes everywhere, and a silver pregnancy is a signal brighter than anything on this earth. Without the obsidian panels, Nadell would have found them before they were strong enough to survive what's coming." Charlotte absorbed this in silence. Somewhere in her chest, a fury that was entirely valid rose and fell and rose again. She was being used, had been from the beginning, by forces larger and older and more deliberate than anything she'd anticipated. And simultaneously, her children were alive because of it. She was not going to pretend the complexity of that wasn't real. "How long?" she asked finally. "Until they're strong enough." Suzanne pressed 2 fingers gently to Charlotte's wrist and closed her eyes. A long moment passed. The hum of the obsidian's shielding filled the silence. 4 weeks, Suzanne said. "Possibly 3, if you keep eating the broth." 4 weeks. Charlotte looked at the chains attached to the wall behind her, then at the door, then at Suzanne's steady, ancient eyes. "Then I need Declan King to stop seeing me as a prisoner," she said,
before he becomes one himself. Suzanne smiled again, the same knowing look, and began to hum something low and wordless while she worked. It was, Charlotte realized with a start, the same melody her mother had hummed over her when she was small and frightened, and the world felt too big. She did not cry, but it was a near thing. Note what Suzanne's role quietly illustrates. That wisdom, real wisdom, the intergenerational kind, is often carried by the elders that institutions overlook. The healer in worn linen knows more than the man in the tailored suit. This is not an accident. It is a reminder to listen to the people society has decided are too old, too small, or too quiet to matter.
On the 18th day, Declan did something unexpected. He invited her to dinner. Not in the obsidian, in the dining room on the 48th floor, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, a long walnut table set for 2, and the kind of carefully curated meal that meant someone had spent time thinking about what she might want to eat, rather than what was convenient to provide. Charlotte sat across from him and said nothing for a moment, just looked at the food. Then she looked at him. "You found something," she said. His jaw worked slightly. "Eat first." "Declan." He was quiet. Then, "Wolfgang found discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Transfers to accounts I didn't authorize, originating from Stefan's access codes. Significant amounts." He paused. "Enough to fund a private army." Charlotte picked up her fork. Not because she was dismissing the conversation, but because she was genuinely hungry, and she had learned to eat when food was available. "Or an ancient entity looking for a door back in," she said. He looked at her across the table, with the same expression he'd worn the first night. That controlled stone, that suppressed flicker. But something was different now. She could not name it yet. They ate. It was, objectively, the strangest dinner Charlotte had ever attended. The conversation moved from the financials to pack history, to the architecture of King Tower, to, somehow, a brief and unexpectedly funny exchange about the particular uselessness of the Magnus Bay Convention's formal protocols, which Charlotte found genuinely absurd, and which made Declan's expression crack, just slightly, into something that was almost a smile. She noticed, because she noticed everything. She also noticed the moment he caught her scent properly for the first time. It happened near the end of the meal. He had leaned forward slightly, reaching for the water carafe in ordinary motion, and then he went still. Not tense. Still.
The particular stillness of a wolf who has caught something that did not match the story he had been telling himself. His eyes moved to her face. Charlotte held his gaze and said nothing. His wolf was recognizing something. She could see the confusion in the slight furrow between his brows, the way his jaw tightened and released. The electromagnetic shielding of the obsidian had been muting it, the true alpha scent that clung to her skin now like silver light, warm and layered, and impossible to categorize. Here, 48 floors up with the shielding off, it hit him full. He didn't understand what he was recognizing, but his wolf did. "You're not what Stefan said you were," he said. His voice was different, not softer exactly, but less armored. "I know," Charlotte said. "What are you?" She looked at him across the walnut table, with the lights of the Hudson behind her and the 2 heartbeats quiet and steady inside her. "I'm the person who is going to save your pack," she said quietly, "if you get out of your own way long enough to let me." He stared at her. Then he poured her more water. It was, she thought, the most significant gesture he had made in 18 days. That night, Declan King sat in his office on the 60th floor and looked at the Manhattan skyline for a very long time. He pulled up Stefan's dossier. He read it cover to cover. Then he read it again. Then he called Wolfgang at midnight. "Find everything," he said. "Go back 5 years. Leave nothing out." Wolfgang was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've already been going back 5 years. There's more." Neither of them slept that night. Wolfgang Kestner had spent 31 years as beta to the King pack. He had watched Declan's father lead with iron discipline, and Declan himself rise with something sharper and more focused than discipline, a precision that could be extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. In all that time, Wolfgang had only ever brought a report to his alpha that he had first verified 3 times. He verified this one 4. Then he walked into Declan's office at 7 in the morning, set a bound report on the desk and said, "Stefan has been systematically stealing from the pack for 3 years. At current rates, he has redirected enough capital to fund what appears to be a shadow infrastructure, private communication servers, off-grid facilities in 4 states, and payments to a network of individuals whose names appear in no official Wolf registry." Declan looked at the report. He did not move for a moment. Then, "How did I miss this?" "You trusted him," Wolfgang said, with no judgment in it. "He was embedded. He had access you gave him because you had no reason not to. That is not a failure of intelligence, Declan. It is a failure of Stefan's character. These are different things." Declan turned to the window. The city below was already moving. Early morning traffic, the faint, distant sound of the world operating as though nothing were wrong. He had built his empire on the belief that information was control, and control was safety. That had been shaken now in ways that were uncomfortable to sit with. "He used my name," Declan said quietly. "He used my authority to frame Charlotte Nightwhisper. He handed me a reason to lock her up, and I took it without—" He stopped. Wolfgang waited. "Without asking the right questions," Declan finished. "Yes." The silence held for a long moment. "The external transfers," Declan said. "Where were they going?" Wolfgang opened the report to page 9 and turned it toward his alpha. 3 separate shell entities, all incorporated within the past 4 years. All inactive except for receiving funds. The last transfer, 2 weeks ago, went somewhere our forensic team cannot trace. The digital signature is unlike anything our systems have seen before. He paused.
It is not from this century, Declan. In terms of its structure and origin,
It predates digital encryption entirely, as though something older put on the shape of a financial transaction. Declan looked at him steadily.
She warned me, he said. Charlotte told me Stefan was feeding something old, something that I didn't negotiate. I know. Wolfgang closed the report. I've been reading what I can find about the Void King. Not much survives in the mainstream records. It was classified by the Council as mythology about 60 years ago. But the older archives... He pressed his lips together. The older archives suggest it was classified as mythology precisely because the Council was afraid of it. Declan was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun was coming up over the buildings to the east, cutting across the glass and steel of the city in long, pale lines. It was, on the surface, an ordinary morning. It was not an ordinary morning. "Release the chains," Declan said. Wolfgang did not let his expression change, but something in his shoulders eased. "Yes, Alpha. And bring her anything she asks for. Food, books, whatever she needs." He paused. "Don't tell her it came from me." Wolfgang paused at the door. "Why not?" Declan did not turn from the window. "Because she'll think it's strategic." "Isn't it?" A long beat. "Not entirely," Declan said. Wolfgang left without another word. The financial fraud that Stefan ran is not a fictional device. It mirrors the very real and documented patterns of institutional embezzlement, where trusted insiders exploit access over long periods precisely because their position makes them above suspicion. Accountability structures exist for a reason. No person should be exempt from oversight because of their rank or their relationship to power. This is true in wolf packs and corporations and governments alike.
The attack came on the 23rd night. There was no warning, or rather, there was, but it came in the form of something the building's security systems were not designed to detect. The first sign was the lights. Not a power failure. They didn't flicker or dim. They simply drained, as though something were pulling the warmth out of each bulb individually, leaving behind a cold, grey luminescence that made the air itself feel wrong. Charlotte was awake. She had been awake for the past hour, sitting cross-legged on the steel platform, breathing slowly, feeling the way the 2 heartbeats beneath her ribs had shifted in the last hour from their usual steady rhythm to something more urgent, like a warning or a preparation. She had learned to trust them. The lights drained further. The electromagnetic hum of the obsidian's shielding stuttered, once, twice, and somewhere on the floor above, she heard what sounded like 3 rapid gunshots, followed by absolute silence. Not the silence of someone who had run, the silence of someone who was no longer capable of running. The shadows at the edge of the room began to move. This was the thing about Nadell, the Void King, that no contemporary wolf theory had adequately prepared anyone for. It did not arrive. It seeped. It found the dark places in a space, behind panels, beneath floors, inside the spaces between engineered certainties, and it filled them. And then it expanded. Charlotte stood. The chains attached to the wall behind her were silver-plated titanium alloy, the kind of restraint designed to hold a shifting wolf in full form. They had held her for 23 days without strain. Now, as Charlotte stood with her spine straight and her hands open at her sides, and the silver in her blood responded to whatever dark thing was pressing against the walls of the obsidian, it woke. It was not dramatic. It did not hurt. It was more like the memory of a fire, finding its kindling after years of cold. A warmth that moved outward from the 2 heartbeats inside her and spread through her skin like light pressing against glass. Her silver-white hair lifted. Her eyes, which were the pale grey of early dawn on most days, shifted to something luminescent. The chains cracked at the wrist, not from force, from incompatibility.
Silver against silver. The dead metal versus the living bloodright. And the bloodright won. Both links split clean at the anchor point and hit the obsidian floor with a sound like 2 notes of a bell. Charlotte looked at her wrists, rubbed them once. Then she walked to the door. In the corridor outside the obsidian, one of Declan's guards, the young one who had slowed his step when she thanked him 11 days ago, was pressed against the wall, holding a flashlight with both hands and trying to breathe through what was clearly a panic response. His name, she had learned in the intervening days, was Wren. He was 24. He sent most of his salary home to his mother in Tennessee. He looked at her wrists where the chains had been. He looked at her eyes. He swallowed. "Are you one of the good guys?" he asked. "Yes," Charlotte said. "Okay," he said, and fell in behind her without another word. It was that simple and that human. And later, when people told the story of what happened in King Tower that night, they would make it larger and more complex than it was. But the truth was, it started with a young man choosing to believe a woman whose hands were free and whose eyes were full of light. That is always how it starts. The Void's shadows were moving up through the building from the parking levels. On floor 12, 3 of Declan's elite team had stopped responding to comms. On 27, the emergency lights had gone entirely dark. In the security center on floor 30, Wolfgang Kerstner was running triage with the precision of a man who had planned for many contingencies, but stood in a building beginning to breathe wrong. "Alpha," he said into his earpiece. "The woman from the obsidian, she's loose." Declan's voice came back fast and sharp. "Where?" "Moving up. She appears to be heading toward you." A pause. "Declan, the shadows are moving away from her. Whatever she is, they're avoiding her." Silence on the line, then, "Let her through. Don't block her. Don't slow her down." "And Wren?" "He stays with her," Declan said. "He's been protecting her for weeks. I'm not about to stop him now." Declan King had faced 3 hostile takeover attempts, 2 assassination plots, and a full territorial challenge from the Western Coalition. He had won all of them. He had never lost. Nadell was not like any of those things. He found the Void King on the 58th floor in the central boardroom, the room with the oval glass table and the view of the entire Manhattan grid, the room where he had made decisions that moved markets and reshaped territories. It was not a room he had ever felt small in. He felt very small now. Nadell was not a figure, exactly. It wore the approximate shape of one, tall, dark, a suggestion of form where darkness had decided to become intentional, but the edges of it moved wrong, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and the air around it had the particular coldness of something that had never been warm. It had 3 of his best people standing motionless beside it, their eyes open and empty, their wolf spirits simply absent, not dead, erased. Declan's alpha authority hit Nadell like a stone hitting fog. The entity turned its approximate face toward him with the slow indifference of something that had outlasted 100 things like him. "Alpha King," it said, in a voice that was not one voice, but the echo of many that had once been voices.
"You have something I want. You'll find that's a very common experience for people who deal with me," Declan said.
Nadell moved. Not quickly. It didn't need to move quickly. It expanded. The darkness around it pressed forward in a wave, and Declan, for all his precision and his training and the formidable architecture of his will, felt his alpha spirit compress under it like a candle under a bell jar. He went to one knee, not because he chose to, because his body simply reached the limit of what strength alone could hold. He had one moment on that knee where he thought, "This is where it ends." Then the light came. It entered from the corridor behind him, not a flash or an explosion, but a steady, building silver warmth that pressed against the darkness the way a sunrise presses against a room that has been closed for too long. It came through the boardroom door and moved past him and stood between him and Nadell, and it was Charlotte. He had not prepared himself for what it meant to see her like this. He had seen her for 23 days in a room designed to diminish. He had watched her be precise and controlled and unflinching. He had caught her scent at dinner and felt his wolf stir in ways he hadn't allowed himself to examine. But this was something outside the vocabulary of anything he had studied or built or achieved. Her silver-white hair moved with a light that was coming from within her. Her eyes were entirely luminescent now. The silver aura that radiated from her was not aggressive, it was encompassing, protective. The kind of light that doesn't destroy what it touches, but simply makes darkness impossible to sustain. Nadell recoiled. It was a small recoil, barely a shift in the edges of its form, but it was the first time Declan had seen the entity register anything as a threat. "You cannot be here," Nadell said. The voice was different now, still many-layered, but there was something in it that had not been there before.
Something that was not quite scary, but was adjacent to it. "I am here," Charlotte said simply. The aura around her expanded. The three members of Declan's team who had been standing empty-eyed blinked, staggered, and caught themselves against the table. Ren, who had come in behind Charlotte, and pressed himself against the doorframe with the practical bravery of someone who was definitely terrified, but staying anyway, exhaled audibly. Nadell pressed back. Charlotte held. Declan, from the floor, looked up at the woman he had chained for 23 days and felt something move through him that he did not have a name for yet. It was not guilt, though guilt was in there. It was not awe, though awe was in there too. It was the specific, humbling recognition of a person who has been profoundly wrong about something that mattered. He had locked up the most extraordinary thing he had ever encountered and called it a security measure. Charlotte glanced back at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were full of silver light and something else, something warmer, something tired and steady and human. "I need you to get up," she said. "I'm trying," he said. "I know. I'll hold the line. You get up." He got up. Later, much later, after everything, when people asked Declan King what made him believe her, he would say, "She told me to get up. Not because she needed a hero. She was already one. She told me to get up because she knew I was capable of it, and she refused to let me decide otherwise." He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who deferred to him. She was the first person who had ever simply expected him to rise. He knelt beside her, not in defeat this time, but in something deliberate, and looked up at her face. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong about everything, about you, about what I thought I knew. I'm sorry." Charlotte looked down at him. The silver light softened slightly around her edges. "I know," she said. "Get off the floor, Declan." "We're not done yet." He almost smiled. It was the wrong moment, and entirely the right one. Real accountability, the kind that means something, does not arrive in a press release or a carefully worded statement. It arrives the way Declan's did. Quietly, on your knees, in the middle of the worst night of your life, addressed directly to the person you harmed. That is the only version that is worth anything. The battle for King Tower did not look like the battles in the old texts. There were no armies arranged in fields under a silver moon. There was no formal challenge, no ritual circle, no ancient ceremony of horns and torches. It was a skyscraper in Manhattan at 3 a.m, and the fight was floor by floor, corridor by corridor,
with Declan's surviving team falling back under the shadow pressure, while Charlotte moved through the building like a controlled tide. She did not fight Nadell. She contained it. There was a distinction that mattered. The silver blood, as Suzanne had explained it, was not a weapon. It was an authority. It did not destroy, it defined. It drew lines between what was allowed and what was not, between the darkness that belonged to the natural order and the darkness that had overstayed its welcome in a world it was not supposed to inhabit. Charlotte moved through the floors, calling to the surviving wolves by name, not with an alpha command, not the kind of authority that pressed down from above and demanded compliance. With something older and stranger and more honest. The true king authority that Suzanne had described bypassed the hierarchy entirely. It did not ask wolves to obey. It reminded them, somewhere below the level of conscious thought, of what they actually were and what they were actually capable of. "Ren," she said, at the 32nd floor stairwell, where he had been holding a position alone for 12 minutes. "You've been holding this line since before I got here. Don't stop now." He straightened. "Yes, ma'am." She moved on. On the 41st floor, she found 3 wolves who had retreated into a supply room and locked the door, their wolf senses overwhelmed by the shadow presence. She knocked. She said, "My name is Charlotte Nightwhisper. The void cannot cross where I have walked. Follow me or stay here, but if you come, do not look at the dark places. Look at the light." 2 of the 3 came out. That was enough.
Declan worked beside her, not leading, for the first time in his life, operating in full support of someone else's authority. His tactical instinct was extraordinary. He read the building's layout as a battlefield with the speed of someone who had built the place and memorized every exit. He coordinated his team with clipped efficiency, creating channels and flanks that gave Charlotte the line of movement she needed. Wolfgang was everywhere at once, managing communications, repositioning resources, doing the 300 small logistical things that the difference between surviving and not surviving came down to in the end. "He's good," Charlotte said to Declan, between floors, watching Wolfgang redirect a team toward the eastern stairwell with a single hand signal. "He's the reason I'm still alive," Declan said simply. Charlotte nodded. "Tell him that, out loud, more than once." Declan looked at her. "The people who hold up the people in charge," she said, "deserve to hear it, not as a management strategy, as a truth." Declan did not respond, but something moved in his expression that she recognized by now. The specific look of a person who has been told something they already knew and had been failing to act on. Suzanne appeared on the 44th floor, moving through the gray light with the unhurried certainty of someone who had been present at catastrophes before and knew how they ended. She pressed a small, smooth disc of silver into Charlotte's hand without stopping. "Your mother carried this in a similar situation," Suzanne said. "She didn't need it in the end either, but it will help you focus." Charlotte closed her hand around it. It was warm. It should not have been warm. She did not say anything. There were no words large enough for that moment. She kept moving. On the 58th floor, the boardroom, where Nadell had retreated to consolidate after Charlotte's initial push, the shadows had thickened into something almost solid. The temperature was cold enough to frost the glass. 2 of the emergency lights had been absorbed entirely, their bulbs dark and smokeless, the way lights went out when something other than electricity took them. Charlotte stood at the boardroom door. Declan stood beside her. "Together," he said. She looked at him. He was asking, not commanding, not coordinating. Asking. She nodded. They walked in. Nadell had grown during the hours it had roamed the building. What had arrived as a seeping darkness was now something denser and more deliberate.
a presence that had been eating the ambient energy of the building floor by floor, feeding on the fear sweat of 50 wolves and the electromagnetic pulse of $1 billion worth of technology. It filled the boardroom the way water fills a closed space, completely, evenly, leaving no air. Charlotte walked in and did not slow her pace. The silver light moved with her, that steady, encompassing warmth that had nothing theatrical about it. It was not a performance. It was a fact. The way sunlight on a winter morning is a fact, quiet and cold-edged, and completely indifferent to whether anyone finds it dramatic. Nadell turned on her with the full weight of what it was. Charlotte felt it land. She would not pretend otherwise. The void's attention was a physical thing, a pressure behind the eyes, a cold at the base of the spine, the specific unpleasantness of something ancient and patient and enormously powerful regarding you as insignificant. Her knees wanted to bend. Her breathing wanted to fracture. The 2 heartbeats inside her pulsed back, sharp and bright and certain. She held. "You are not of this age," she said, and her voice carried in the darkness with a resonance that surprised even her, as though the room itself were amplifying it, as though the walls had been waiting for someone to say this specific thing. "You were returned here by deception, and maintained here by greed. You have no right to this place. You have no right to these people." Nadell pressed forward. The darkness expanded. Charlotte raised her hand, open palm outward, and the silver light blazed. Not explosively, not as a weapon, as a boundary, as a line drawn with the authority of a bloodline that had existed longer than the current shape of the world, and had survived every darkness it had encountered before this one. Declan moved to her left flank, precisely, quietly, using his alpha authority not to lead, but to reinforce. He was not pushing the darkness back himself. He was lending the weight of his will to hers, adding his strength to her position, the way a second anchor stabilizes a structure already standing. The darkness recoiled, harder this time. "Now," Charlotte said. Declan did not hesitate. His alpha command, the full force of it, every generation of King Pack authority behind it, the kind of command that could stop a shifting wolf mid-form, hit the boardroom at the same moment Charlotte's silver light reached its full intensity. It was not a destruction. Nadell was too old to destroy. But it was a severing, a clean, definitive cut between what belonged here and what did not. Between the void that had been fed through a door by a greedy man and the world on the other side of that door that had every right to close it. The darkness contracted. It contracted further. And then, in the space of a single held breath, it compressed into a point of absolute black that hung in the center of the boardroom for one suspended second and was gone. The lights came back, not all at once, gradually, floor by floor, like a building waking from a dream. The frost on the boardroom windows began to melt. The temperature climbed back toward normal. From somewhere far below, Charlotte heard the sound of wolves exhaling in unison, a sound like an entire building breathing out. Declan turned to her. She was very still. The silver light had faded back to its quiet, resident level, the faint luminescence in her eyes,
The warmth in her skin that you only noticed if you were standing close. She was looking at her open hand, and she was, very slightly, smiling. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "They're fine." He understood. He looked at her hand, the one resting at her side now, the one that had, through the entire fight, occasionally pressed briefly against her abdomen. He had noticed it for the first time at dinner 18 days ago, and had told himself it meant nothing. He understood now that it meant everything. "They're mine," he said. It was not a question.
He had known it somewhere below conscious acknowledgement since the boardroom the first time, since the scent at dinner, since every moment his wolf had been trying to tell him something his pride had been refusing to hear. Charlotte looked at him. Her expression was steady and unsurprised, and carrying the particular weight of someone who has been waiting for the right moment for something true to be said. "Yes," she said simply. The silence between them was different from every silence that had come before it. Those had been full of distance and suspicion, and the weight of wrong assumptions. This one was full of something that had not been there before, something that was going to take time to name and longer to build properly, but was undeniably present. Wren appeared in the doorway. He looked at the empty space where the darkness had been. He looked at Charlotte. He looked at Declan, still standing close. "I'm going to go check on the floors," he said, and disappeared with the excellent instincts of someone who had learned, in one very long night, exactly when to give people space. Wolfgang appeared beside him in the corridor, and, without looking up from his communications tablet, said, "Good thinking, Wren. Come with me." Wren followed, looking relieved. Stefan Voss was arrested on a Tuesday morning in the lobby of a Los Angeles hotel by a joint team of PAC enforcers from the King, Northern Ridge, and Coastal Summit territories. The first tri-PAC enforcement action in 22 years. He was wearing an expensive watch and a suit that did not fit his posture. When the lead enforcer presented the formal charges, financial fraud, conspiracy against multiple wolf territories, funding of a forbidden entity, the wrongful imprisonment of a Silver Bloodline member, and the unlawful detention of a non-combatant, Stefan looked at the small crowd of hotel staff and guests who had paused to watch and made one calculation. This was his audience. This was his chance to perform. "I want my legal representation," he said, with the practiced composure of someone who had been rehearsing this moment. "They've been notified," the lead enforcer said pleasantly. "They're the ones who told us where you were staying." Stefan's composure was, briefly, very imperfect. He was formally exiled to the Rogue Lands by unanimous council ruling 11 days later. He did not make a speech. He had been advised, strongly and from several directions simultaneously, that it would not help him. Dolores was released from Stefan's property on the same Tuesday morning, 3 hours before his arrest. When she was told that her sister was alive and unharmed, she sat down on the steps outside and cried for 4 minutes, with the complete abandon of someone who had been holding it together for 3 weeks and was finally allowed to stop. Then she stood up, fixed her expression, and said, "I want to see her. Now." The reunion between Charlotte and Dolores happened in a conference room on the 48th floor of King Tower, with a view of the Hudson and a full spread of food that Wolfgang had organized because he had correctly predicted that neither of them would have eaten properly in days. They did not speak for the first full minute. They just held on. Then Dolores pulled back, looked at her sister's face and said, "You have something to tell me." Charlotte laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 23 days, and it was real. The kind of laugh that comes out of relief so deep it has nowhere else to go. "Sit down," she said. "I have quite a few things to tell you." 3 weeks after the night the darkness came to King Tower, Declan King called a formal meeting of the PAC leadership and, in front of every senior member of the King territory, renounced the title of Billionaire Alpha. Not the wealth, not the company, not the tower or the resources or the empire he had spent 15 years building. The title. "The Alpha rank is a position of service," he said, standing at the head of the long table with a steadiness that was different from his usual controlled authority. Quieter, more considered. "I have not always treated it as such. I have treated it as ownership, as the right to be unquestioned. That is not what leadership is. I'm learning that, slowly. And I intend to do better." He paused. I will serve as consort to the Silver Queen and as father to the true kings. That is not a demotion. That is, for the first time in my life, the right use of everything I have." The room was quiet. Wolfgang, seated to his left, said nothing, but he pressed his large hand briefly against the table in a gesture that, in 31 years, had come to mean, "Well done." Charlotte was in the room. She had been seated at the far end of the table, deliberately, specifically, at the other head, in a dress of deep ivory and silver that Dolores had helped her choose that morning. Her posture was the same as it had always been, upright, regal rather than performed, the posture of someone who had never actually lost themselves, even when everything around them was designed to make them. After the meeting, after the formal proceedings had dissolved into the quieter and considerably less formal business of people getting coffee and re-establishing the working relationships that a supernatural crisis tends to disrupt, Declan crossed the room to where she was standing at the window. He didn't approach her with the alpha authority he usually wore, the way other people wore cologne. He just walked over, like a person. "You don't have to stay in the tower," he said. "I want to be clear about that. The resources are yours regardless. The protection is yours regardless. I'm not attaching conditions." She looked at him. There were a great many things he was not saying, and she heard all of them. "I know," she said. "That's one of the reasons I've decided to stay." Outside the window, Manhattan moved in its usual brilliant, indifferent way. 10 million lives at speed, going about the business of the world with no idea that 2 floors below the boardroom, where the darkness had been driven out, a woman was standing next to a man who was learning, for the first time, what it felt like to stop reaching for power and start reaching towards someone. The 2 heartbeats pulsed, steady and bright. Everything was going to be fine. Not easily, not all at once, but fine in the way that real things become fine. Incrementally, honestly, with the occasional backslide and the patient understanding that building something true takes longer than tearing it down. It would take time. They had time. Suzanne, for her part, declined the formal title that the new Silver Council voted to bestow on her. She accepted, however, a very comfortable set of rooms in the tower's residential wing, and an arrangement whereby she was permitted to grow whatever herbs she required on the 42nd floor terrace. "Herbs," Wolfgang confirmed to the building manager, stone-faced. "The terrace is being converted to herb cultivation. Yes, permanently. No, it is not up for discussion." Ren was promoted twice in the 6 months that followed. He sent home a larger portion of his salary. His mother called it a miracle. He called it a choice he made in a dark corridor for a woman whose hands were free and whose eyes were full of light. He was not wrong. "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because if Charlotte's journey moved something in you tonight, if you felt the weight of those chains, the warmth of that silver light, the moment Declan finally got off the floor and got it right, then this story did exactly what it was made to do. Thank you so much for being here. From the very first word to this moment, your presence is what makes stories like this reach the people who need them most. Please hit that subscribe button right now, smash that like, and, most importantly, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in Atlanta, Toronto, Accra, Dublin, Sydney? I will personally love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story has traveled. It means everything. Now, let's close this story the way it deserves. There is a version of Charlotte Night Whisper's story that ends at the chains, with the cold and the silence and the weight of being disbelieved by someone with the power to imprison you simply win. Where she breaks, where the silver light never wakes, where the 2 heartbeats go unprotected. That is not the version that happened. And the reason it is not the version that happened is not that Charlotte was extraordinary, though she was. It is that she chose every single day in that room to stay upright, to keep her spine straight, to trust what she knew to be true even when every structure around her had been built to convince her she was wrong. The real lesson in this story is not about silver blood, or true kings, or ancient shadows driven back into the dark. Those are the vehicles. The destination is this: power without accountability destroys. Strength without empathy isolates.
Authority without service is just controlled by another name. And the most dangerous thing a powerful person can do is decide, without asking, that they already know the truth. Declan King had to lose everything he thought he controlled to find out what he actually had. Charlotte Nightwhisper had to survive everything the world threw at her to stand in the light she was always going to become. Wolfgang Kirstner had to trust his instincts over his deference to remind us that loyalty is not silence. It is the courage to tell the truth to someone who has the power to punish you for it. Stefan lost, not because he was outmaneuvered, but because he built his entire strategy on the assumption that he was the smartest person in any room he entered. He wasn't. He never was. And that story is older than the Void King, and just as reliably ended. As for the two tiny heartbeats, the true kings who pulsed their way through a dungeon and a corporate war, and the very real presence of ancient darkness, and came out on the other side, healthy, wanted, and arriving into a world that had rearranged itself to receive them. They were born on a Thursday morning in spring, in a room that Declan had spent 3 weeks quietly overbuilding, with every safety specification that Suzanne had suggested, and several that he had added himself, on the principle that more is more when it comes to protecting what matters. They were, by all accounts, extraordinary. But then, given their mother, that was never really in doubt. Thank you for walking this path with us tonight. From the obsidian darkness of that dungeon to the silver light of what came after, you were here for every step. That matters more than we can say. If this story stayed with you, if Charlotte's endurance felt familiar, if Declan's slow unlearning felt honest, if the small bravery of an ordinary man named Wren, choosing to believe in a woman whose hands were free and whose eyes were full of light, felt like something worth remembering, then carry it with you. The strongest wolves are not the ones who chain what they cannot understand. They are the ones who let it go, watch it stand in its own light, and are humble enough to follow where it leads. Good night. May the moon guide your way.